Hi, my name is Sandy Berkenbush. I live at 23 Farm Lane, which is Chestnut Hill Farm, in West Newbury. Um, and the farm has been in my family since 1909. So my great-grandparents bought the farm with 60 acres and everything but the ducks in the pond, which they belonged to the hired man who stayed. And the 60 acres included what's now the high school and also the homes up on Chestnut Hill. So the farm was named after the chestnut trees that were on the top of Chestnut Hill, but a blight in the 20s wiped out those trees. Although we still have a stump by the fireplace in the fireplace room. And my great-grandmother and my father planted in the late 20s pine trees up on the hill. So now the pine trees that are, 100 years old are up on top of the hill. And some of them have been harvested for buildings and different things. So it's been kind of an interesting culmination of everything that's gone on. So the farm was where the high school was the actually the market garden. So they would plant, the garden would be planted and the produce would go into Boston to Haymarket Square. And when the school was built, which it was completed in 1958, I believe, that wiped out that resource. So they had at that point cows, dairy cows, but also they did the subdivision up on the hill in the 60s to supplement the income of my grandparents. So my great-grandmother died in 1969. So I remember very much as a little girl. I was the youngest and the only girl, so I was her favorite. And she was just an incredible person. She did the pageant. She started, was one of the founding members of the Women's Club. She, I'm sure, was a suffragette. We were trying to figure out if she was part of the Roses War that went on in, the demonstrations that went on in Lawrence, but we don't have any evidence of it. But there have been articles and books written about both she and my great-grandfather. They divorced in 1919, so she was here with 4 kids by herself, which was definitely avant-garde for West Newbury. There's a book that's written about the farm called A Fearful Innocence, and in there I think that they were a little bit astounded that when people would come, women would come to the farm, she would make them a bloomer suit. So back in the day, they were all wearing long dresses, and that really didn't work on the farm. So she would make them a bloomer suit, and that's what they would wear when they were here. And the locals thought that somehow there were German Catholic Jews that were living down here, which is really an interesting proposition for an Anglo. Albertson is an Anglo name. So anyway, that was an interesting part. And she wrote the pageant for the centennial in 1919, which is a great story in the history of the river and the communities that came along the river. So that you can certainly see in the library. And as I said, she was very much progressive and always very helpful to people. Her contributions were certainly that. And then there were always people that were here that needed help. So whether it was one family was here. I thought they were here for a number of years when I was a little kid. And their father had been killed in a car accident, and they came and stayed here. And they said it was only for a year and a half. But, the doors were open, and there was always somebody that was here that needed some sort of assistance or help. In during the Depression, which obviously was a very difficult time, there was a lot of help that came from people who had been here in the teens and 20s, who turned out to be students at Harvard and then went on to have very storied lives. Walter Lippmann was here. He married one of my great-grandfather's older daughters. And Leonard Bernstein was here. So there was a lot of Bernard Cohen was here. So there was a lot of Harvard people that came out here for the weekend. They kind of had a weekend kind of place that went on, and there was a brochure. My dad used to say that you'd wake up in the morning and look at the shoes by the fireplace and try and figure out who was here. So there are a lot of those stories. I often have wished that there was a video that went on about the early days, because that would have been just remarkable. And people still walk down the driveway and say, "Is anybody by the name of Albertson live here anymore?" And so we just had a gentleman that came, and he's coming back to take pictures of the fields because he came in the wintertime, and he is doing a movie about an artist that was here. So all sorts of stuff. And it was funny because I was like, would this be part of his work? Would that be part of his work? Because some of the pieces that we have that have been handed down, we don't know who did them. That piece has been lost. So it's really a blessing to have it be in the family for this long. We celebrate it every 5 years with a reunion. And a lot of people, a lot of my generation, this is their only tie to West Newbury anymore because their parents are gone, or everybody's moved away. So it just is a nice kind of a tribute to everything that went on here. My dad grew up here, went off to the war, came back, started business, became the fire chief the year I was born. And he was fire chief for 35 years, and then he was police chief for 11, and then they made him retire, so he became a selectman. So, and it took an act of the state government to let him work as a police chief until he was 66. So that he was very much involved. I always said I was the invisible Berkenbush until I became a realtor, and then I had to get my name out there. And one point somebody said, "You related to..." They always ask me if I'm related to my father, but this time they were asking him if he was related to me, which I was, I'll turn around. It's a beautiful community. I think that the fact that our land is so fertile has made it a great farming community. It also means that the clay holds the water, and so septic systems are difficult, which as a realtor can be a challenge, but it has definitely maintained the character of the community. If sewer had ever come into town, it would be a much different community. So it is total septic, and that has allowed us to be able to maintain the character that we have. So it's kind of a blessing in disguise. I know that the water went through about a third of the town, but sewer never came into any part of it, and that's something that has really made the community. We were talking about the river earlier, and the river has always been the focus of the whole valley, and during the Industrial Revolution, obviously, it powered the mills upstream, which also powered the pollution that came downstream. One thing is the loosestrife, which is a purple flower that blooms probably in August. That actually came from the wool from Scotland. And so the Merrimack River was the first place that this was, in America. Now you'll see it around, but it started here. And it was just from this washing the wool and the seeds flowing down the river. So that was a good part of the pollution. um, my great grandmother, one of her famous quotes was that she threw her sorrows into the river and let them wash downriver to the sea. And she, also had a campaign with the Women's Club to their motto was to clean it up or hot top it. So just she was always an advocate of taking care of the river. It is an incredible resource, and it has been was the source of disease going downriver, typhoid, etc., for years. But now, we were talking about this earlier, the Clean Water Act in the late 60s and early 70s. I did a survey from my civics class, and I talked to people who lived along the river, and at that time they were called river rats because it was not clean, and asked them if they thought their property values would go up if the river was clean. So I guess I was destined to be a realtor. And so it has always been a beautiful asset. It needs to be taken care of. During the Clean Water Act, they did clean it up, but they didn't, unfortunately, take into account the type of building that would be happening in the next 50 years. So that's what we're facing now, is the fact that all the communities up and down the river's populations have just grown. I think West Newbury's has doubled, but a lot of the cities, etc., the population has just grown in that, and obviously we live much differently than people did in the 1950s and 60s when they would take a bath once a week, or I mean, just craziness how much water we use. A lot of an old story of them skating on the river and holding their jackets open and getting blown home. There's a story about my great grandmother going down the river on an iceberg.
Intentionally?
Oh yeah, yeah. Yep. Some kids did it about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, on River Road, but they had wetsuits on and, lounge chairs and things like that. I don't think she quite did that. And I sent it to one of the kids that grew up here, and he said, see?
It's a thing.
It's a thing. It's still going on. As a kid, the river was filthy. The factories all upriver would close down for 2 weeks, and I assume it was the last week in July and the first week in August, and they would dump all the chemicals into the river. So they would run iridescent. They'd be all different colors, and it would be a huge fish kill. So you can imagine the middle of July, you've got all these dead fish that are floating by. And so we were good shots with a BB gun because we would sink them as they floated by. I was the youngest and the only girl, so I was definitely a tomboy growing up. At that point, some of the older boys water skied, but it was like you got off those water skis and you were in the shower. So it was definitely nothing that anybody messed around with.
A feeling that we have such a heightened environmental awareness now. Were people upset when they saw the river?
Oh God, yes. And that's how but what could you do? Here comes my brother Scott on the lawnmower. So what can you do when it's industry?
Yeah.
So that was part of that whole thing. So it just that's but as kids it was dirty, and we really didn't go near it a lot. But we had a cat that used to go down and fish. Yeah, she was. The story was, she followed me home from school on a string, and we lived on Main Street at the time, and so I gave her to my great grandmother because my father couldn't tell her she couldn't have a cat. So And so she lived to be 16, but had been on her own for a little while when she followed me home. And so when she was a house cat, and when the barn cats had kittens, she'd teach them how to hunt. So she'd bring, some half-dead creature back and teach them what to do. But she would actually go down and get hornpout, which is catfish with all the prongs and things, out of the river. Her favorite thing was to bring them up and finish them off underneath the dining room table.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. So, there were always pets and things that were going on, but always barn cats and usually a couple of dogs
Yeah.
that were here. And you really need. My brother can tell when we're at camp in Maine because the critters start to come in when the dog is gone. Yeah, yeah. So when Tahoe's not here, everybody comes back to play.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
There's
So
probably all kinds of critters.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yep. But he pretty much keeps them at bay. They just decide it's much easier to walk around.
Yeah.
So the story goes, my great grandmother was R.A.'s second wife. He was a minister and had a commune in Georgia called the Christian Commonwealth. And at which point they wanted to invite all the people who didn't have anything to come to the commune. Well, they all came, but they didn't particularly work. I don't, from what I understand. And he his three daughters lived, but his son died of some disease. And I'm blanking on it now. I'm sure it's written down, but and so he and the first wife were divorcing, and he married my great grandmother, who was about maybe a couple years older than his daughters. And so they were in Jamaica Plain. He was teaching. They were doing a lot of work with the immigrants that were coming in. They had a college that was in the North End, that we actually there's a plaque we all went into when the plaque was dedicated, and that was where they were really helping the immigrants come in and get themselves acclimated to America. So they were teaching them English, they were teaching them how to navigate our finances, and et cetera, et cetera. And they had a magazine or a newspaper called the Boston Common. Mr. Filene's was in the middle of it all, and a lot of people from Harvard. So Harvard seemed to be the connection with the city, that is kind of the they would come out for weekends and et cetera, et cetera. And so and Bernard Cohen's wife, Frances Davis, is the one who wrote the book. Her father was also very involved in this whole everything that was going on in the North End, and a lot of it was with the Jewish people because they were Jewish. We were not, but they were, and they were a lot of the Jewish people were coming from Russia, etc. My great grandfather went off to do something in the Russian Revolution, and then that's when the divorce happened. So she was here with the four kids, and the youngest one, Ming, had some sort of a heart defect that would be totally curable at this point, and she died, I think, when she was about 18. So my grandmother stayed here. Well, actually, she eloped and then came back when my father was a year and a half old, and my Peggy was about 2.5. So they're the first two kids, and then they came back and never left the farm again. So my grandfather had been recruited by my great-grandmother's father to come take care of the machinery on the farm. And he, all these intellects didn't know one end of a screwdriver from the other, so he stayed here to take care of all of that.
And what was his name?
Kenneth Berkenbush.
Okay.
So there are now three Kenneth Berker, well, actually four Kenneth Berkenbushes, but yeah, so he was one of like nine in Pennsylvania. And so he came here, and that's where the Berkenbush name comes from, the lineage. And the only thing that we do is have pork and sauerkraut on New Year's Day. That's the only German tradition we have. And it doesn't matter where I am. I have to have pork and sauerkraut on New Year's Day for good luck for the year. So, but it became very much a situation where he was always doing a lot of his family would come up and spend summers, and so harvesting the gardens, etc., was a full-time job that went on. The garden was most of this yard out here. And
Years was that?
oh, well, it probably, I would say, went on. I don't know when it started, long before me. We were talking about the catalpa tree, and the first catalpa tree was had the garden all around it. And as little kids, we would have a little village in the dirt underneath the tree so that the women that were taking care of the garden could make sure we weren't doing something crazy. And we always did, it was called Nowhere, that little town. And so, but that was, it fed all the people here at the farm. It fed my Aunt Peggy would come up for 6 weeks with her two kids, and the Lars would come up from Pittsburgh with their three kids, and harvest would go on. And you know, the fields out here were planted in corn, and everything was either canned, frozen. There were thousands of packages of food that went up every year. So that basically, and there were pigs that were here, so that, and then there were beef cattle that were here as well. So it was pretty much, shopping was a much different adventure than it is now, because you know, all the fruits and the vegetables were all preserved. And so basically you were shopping for, you know, cleaning products and meat and that kind of stuff, but not, you know, everything was put up. So that is, I was visiting some cousins up in Maine, and they were still doing it. I was like, yeah, that was a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
So
How old were you when that sort of ceased?
I was married. So I mean, you know, I got married in '78. It is it was a 7-bedroom farmhouse. And so when right before I got married, my grandfather died. And so it was just my uncle and my aunt my uncle and my grandmother that were here for 7 bedrooms. So we took 3 bedrooms and made a little apartment. And then I had my daughter within a year, and there was no way I was taking her away. My grandmother was her best friend growing up, so she was a child of the farm for sure. And it really, I would say probably by the 80s, it had slowed way down. But as I said, my aunt would come up from New York with her two kids, and she would just go back with coolers full of frozen food. And you know, all the tomatoes and everything, was the peaches and just jams and jellies. I mean, you got up and there was a project that was going on, and it depended on what was coming in. And you know, it just, that's the way it was, from everything from sauerkraut and beans to, you know, and then we always had pigs. And one time, Erica was, this about 45 years ago, Erica was just a baby, and the pigs were going to go to slaughter. So the guys had figured out if they made a larger pen, then they could get the pigs into the new part of the pen, and they wouldn't get all mucky trying to get the pigs into the truck. And so, but they didn't build the second fence very well. So that whole week before the pigs went to slaughter, I was running around with a grain bucket, getting them back into the pen. And so I remember the high school track team ran through, and I've got this kid on my hip, and I've got 4 pigs and a bucket of grain, and I'm like, what has happened to me? This is always, Private Benjamin comes out, and I'm like, I want to go to lunch. I want to wear sandals. You know, what have I done to my life? So the pigs were a mainstay. At one point, one of them passed away early on, and my grandfather called up this guy that had a half a pig, and he said, "Sorry, Cliffy, your pig died." He said, "How do you know it was my pig? It was your pig." So that probably went on. Well, Eric was born in 79, so I would say probably by 80, 85, somewhere in there. There were beef cattle that Bert Knowles and my Uncle Kip had. And one year, one of them kept jumping over the fence, so he got named Hamburger. And then the rest of the herd was named, Big Mac and Fillet of Fish, and it went on. But uh, that was probably by the mid '80s. I would say that was what was done. Yeah.
And what was it like for you when that was petering out and life was changing here so significantly?
I was carrying on. I working hard outside the farm. It became very apparent to me from my father supporting the family here as I was growing up that you could not make the money here to live here. And so by 1990, I became a realtor. And in 91, my daughter was diagnosed with cancer. So she was in Dana-Farber. She had a bone cancer when she was 11. So she was being treated, and I was just seeing all of these different things change and happen. And but as I said, it really, I became aware of the fact that you couldn't make the money on the farm to support the farm. And the acquisition of the school was not by eminent domain, but it was almost by eminent domain. And then when the market gardens were gone, then selling the lots off on the hill became what sustained it, and my dad sustained it. So from my mom passed away in 1990, and so in 1990 he moved down here as well. So it was my grandmother and him downstairs, and us tucked in the little apartment. And so it's been a very interesting evolution, but it's a beautiful, beautiful place. I always say old houses teach you patience because you can't fix them in a day, and and they always need to be fixed. So that's kind of one of the beauties of it all. But it is a very precious place, as I said, in not only in my family's hearts, but in also the generations that are still around who have been taken in um, by the family to help them grow until they could get back on their feet. So a lot of that went on. I think my great grandmother was very much into education and philanthropy and all of those things. And I there are letters that we have that she wrote. She used to write a Christmas letter to everybody that wasn't here. And it talks about a little bit of the sadness, but also the fact that they look forward to it as the kids that were going to be educated and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that was one of the thing was one of the things that had a plus and a minus, a yin and a yang. She was very sad to see what went gone. And the farm lane it was always the lane. And it went straight down. And this maple tree is the last maple tree that is left. There was a whole row of maple trees all the way to the main street. And when they started with the new school, they took down the next to the last one. When I was in school, there was one that provided shade by the football field, and then somebody decided we might get hurt by it. It was, of course, it was also the only shade that we had.
What a shame.
So, it was like, okay,
Yeah.
progress. Yeah, we might get hit by a limb. One of the other things that's pretty cool about this is that, a lot of the plantings are from the garden's called Marnie's Garden. That's my great grandmother. Her name was Hazel, but her nickname was Marnie. And the trees, and so all the different things. We lost the top of one of the spruces, and so this year, my sister-in-law said, "You have to take it down." I said, "No, I don't. I'm not taking it down. When I'm walking across the yard, still looks like my spruce tree." But I can scare the bejesus out of landscapers, I'll tell you, because they expect to plant something and have it look good in 3 years, and the people move out in 7. So but it is a labor of love. But it's a wonderful. We feel very blessed to be this generation's caretakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would think.